Hi, this is Kathleen Eaton, and this is part 3 of the video on spiritual disciplines. We've been discussing in parts 1 and 2 how paganism or pagan teachings and practices came into the church in early Christianity, and right now we're going into a few of those specific early teachers. Clement of Alexandria from 150 to 215 AD was a Christian author and teacher. He was director of the Catechism School at Alexandria, Egypt, around 190 AD. He was writing and known for his writing much before then. He taught a mixture of pagan and Christian teachings to the candidates who were coming into the Christian faith, people who needed to be instructed before they were baptized. Among his teachings, he said that Jesus and the Holy Spirit are not God, but that they were firstborn or created powers, the highest intelligent beings. It's definitely a pagan teaching and not scriptural. Like Plato, Clement saw the world as an organic whole. In other words, the interconnectedness of all creation. It's all one being. All men were endowed by God with a shared mind, the divine mind or consciousness taught by the pagans. He taught the belief of Stoicism, that we needed to suppress the human appetites of the flesh and any desires that could disturb the soul. He used Christian phrases and terms such as rising above earthly things and mortification of the flesh to make his teachings appear to be Christian. Man's ultimate aim in life, according to him, was to achieve the likeness of God, but this was to be achieved by coming to a higher spiritual knowledge of God and the universe through union or unity with God, or the source. This union was to be achieved through methods passed down by the Greek pagans. The union was also to lead to, quote-unquote, the perfection of the faith. Now, if you listened to the first 2 videos, you'll realize that that was pagan teaching. That was their spiritual discipline curriculum that was supposed to lead them to back into being God. He also, now this is probably one of the earliest teachings, I'm not positive it's the earliest, but let me just first say this: the pagan belief was that they ate their bread God and drank their wine God, and by doing so they took into themselves power and spiritual or supernatural benefits of their gods. So this pagan teaching, all of a sudden we see it here when Clement is teaching the Lord's Supper or Eucharist as a sacrifice in which we eat the Logos and the Spirit, which he considered to be different gods, and by eating the Logos and the Spirit we became incorruptible or immortal and received supernatural benefits. So you can definitely see the pagan teaching there. Clement also taught that we were to take the spoils of the Egyptians, basically take their teachings and practices and bring them into the church. Origen, who was his student, 185 to 232 AD, also devoted himself to pagan teachings and practices, and he took over teaching that same catechism school when Clement left. He was authorized to teach there by the church. He taught that humans existed before physical creation as spirit beings, and that by ceasing contemplation of the divine, fell, and because of that fall became physical creation, some of them becoming demons and some of them becoming humans. And then he taught universalism, that all will be saved, including Satan. as definitely unscriptural pagan teaching. Now, while Justin, Martyr, Clement, and Origen taught that Jesus Christ was not the same God or being as the Father who spoke in the Old Testament, the Bible itself, God says that He is the creator of all things. He says repeatedly, there's no other God beside Him. There's no God formed before Him, neither shall there be after Him. He also showed He was both Father and Son, the Messiah. In Zechariah 12:10, we see that He is the one that they have pierced and that they will mourn for as an only Son. The God, the Father, who spoke in the Old Testament is that one that they would pierce. In Isaiah 9, we see that the Father, the Messiah rather, is also called the mighty God and the eternal Father. Athanasius in 296 to 373 AD, his teachings are very confusing and contradictory. Some of them sound like he's speaking of God being separate from the universe, only apparent in its workings or processes He's in it. But then other parts of his teaching are definitely saying that the divinity, presence, and power of God is in all things, in all of creation, and that God is united with or one with the universe. He claimed that we would live as God. He saw all of creation, all the universe, as an organic body. God was the spirit and mind of that body and the life that moved its parts. St. Augustine, Bishop of Hippo in North Africa, 354 to 386. Though some say he retracted his Neoplatonist beliefs, it doesn't really appear that he ever did. He said that the beliefs of the pagans, he believed there were truths among the pagan beliefs, and said that the beliefs of the pagans which were true and in harmony with our faith were to be adapted or adopted in Christian instruction. He immersed himself in Neoplatonist philosophy and merged some of those same pagan teachings with Christianity. He said that all beings were good. Evil or non-being was simply a lack of knowledge of God. And knowledge of God is contemplation of the divine, basically. Evil is a diminishment of good or a lack of good in varying degrees. That is a pagan belief. Turning to God is looking within ourselves. He said some other things which we know are, they're so obviously not scriptural, even if you are not familiar with the pagan teachings. He said when a man continues in faith, hope, and love, they no longer need the scriptures. The Bible teaches us that we are to continue in God's words. That's Old and New Testament. He said that God's nature could not suffer harm and that no one suffers unjustly because God allows it. Well, Jesus Christ, even though He allowed His crucifixion, we know that the actions of those men were considered unrighteous and unjust before God. People do suffer unjustly, regardless of whether God allows man's free will to do evil. It is still evil. It is still unrighteousness. He supported asceticism, willpower, through these ascetic practices for rooting out sin and the desires of the flesh. So it's man's way of trying to get rid of sin. He says that pagan science and philosophy could be used in seeking understanding of the scriptures. Now here's a big problem. You don't go to paganism to understand the scriptures. You understand the scriptures by the scriptures. Okay? So he, by making this statement, shows right out that he used pagan philosophy to try to understand the Christian scriptures. And that's why these teachings were so intermingled. He advocated taking the spoils of the Egyptian and making them the furniture of the temple. At least I believe that was Augustine. I know that, yep, that was Augustine. Okay. Basically, he made it sound as though the spoils of the Egyptians, when during the Exodus, when the Egyptians gave gold and silver and clothing to the Israelites before they left, he uses this to try to say that we should take the stuff of the Egyptians, i.e. their teachings, and make them into furniture for the temple. In other words, we're supposed to bring them into Christianity. It's definitely not a godly teaching. He claimed that not only did pagans borrow from Christians, but Christians borrowed from pagans when he said that Moses was taught the wisdom of the Egyptians. What he forgets is that wisdom of the Egyptians, first of all, includes math, it includes alphabets and letters and things like that, not just occult teachings. In addition to that, Moses had a Hebrew mother who was his nursemaid, and that would have been at least until he was 5. Probably later he still had access to her because he was able to go around by himself and ended up killing an Egyptian man. So he had freedom to move about and to continue his relationship with his mother. She would have taught him the Hebrew scriptures, and as a Hebrew child he would have memorized the teachings of the forefathers. That's a Hebrew practice. He would have memorized the scriptures and teachings that have been passed down by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, I mean, that gives us an understanding of how Moses could have, so long after that history began, wrote down the first 5 books of the Bible. So this is the thing, we've got a godly woman raising Moses, and he understands who he is as a Hebrew. He understands that God spared his life. He understands that the ways of the Egyptians are wrong, and he ends up fleeing from Egypt and ending up in a relationship with the God of his fathers, who leads them out of Egypt and teaches them, among Moses' writings, that they were not to adopt the pagan practices of worship and service to their gods. The same guy who said that is not going to be the guy who practiced those things. So Augustine is basically just making it seem like it's biblical to take pagan teachings and use them for Christianity.